I'm so excited to be here with you today to talk about a very important topic, and that is the upcoming disclosure requirements around cybersecurity. So, where I'm going to start and really focus the main part of my discussion here is around the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and their proposed cybersecurity disclosure. And the reason I'm focusing here is their requirements really are, I think, on a broad basis, really good example of what others are going to be expecting if they aren't already. And I think also as these start to roll out, they're going to probably generate the most news out of either material cybersecurity events being disclosed and how that may impact the key stakeholders or the company itself. And then also, secondly, around how companies, and these are public companies since it's the Securities and Exchange Commission regulating the space, but how public companies are managing cybersecurity and most importantly, how it's being governed within the organization itself. So let's start with the first piece, and that has to do with material cybersecurity incidents. The way I like to explain it, again, in a very simple, straightforward way, it's all about being able to first identify the incident, certainly, but even more importantly, quantify the impact of the incident. And that's where a lot of organizations may have some challenges in being able to apply some sort of risk quantification to an incident that has occurred. And let me tell you why. So on the left-hand side here, these are what I call the immediate reporting requirements that the SEC is going to look for. And it comes through the Form 8K. And so this would be just any sort of filing that is deemed material has to be made. And as it relates to a cybersecurity incident, this is the kicker, I believe, this filing has to be done within 4 business days. And I know the SEC has received a lot of commentary on this proposed rule, but whether or not it remains 4 business days when these requirements are going to be finalized. And by the way, I didn't mention they're targeted by the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and whether or not the 4 business days remains at that level, I think it will be a number, whether it's a few more days out or not. I think it's going to require a lot more timely investigation and quantification around the risk than is being done today for most organizations. So that's huge. And so what's going to need to be included in the filing includes some basic things, when the incident was discovered, whether it's an ongoing incident, certainly some sort of brief description of the nature and the scope, whether any data was stolen, altered, accessed, or used for any unauthorized purpose, the effect of that incident on the company's operations. And again, this is where the quantification piece comes in determining whether it's material to the company's operations and whether or not the company has remediated or is in the process of currently remediating the incident. And then on the right-hand side here, we've got periodic reporting requirements. So these are quarterly or annually filed reports with the SEC, so either the 10Q or the 10K. And it's going to require the same information that I just discussed, as well as any previously undisclosed or immaterial cybersecurity incidents that are related to one another, and then in the aggregate may be material to the organization. So, a company may experience a number of incidents, as a result of poor access control, and individually they may, be unauthorized data that was disclosed. But when you start to tie them together, maybe it's across, all the business units and impacting a large number of customers, that has to be disclosed. And then finally, any updates on individually material incidents that may have been recorded in the Form 8K, updates to progress on remediating those incidents also needs to be included. So that's a lot to pull together. And then the second piece, what I would say, as it relates to risk management governance, it's more about how an organization goes about assessing the risks that they have, certainly managing those risks as it relates to cybersecurity, recovering from a security breach or some sort of risk event, and then most importantly, how that whole process is overseen at the board of directors or other governing body level. The risk management requirements here on the left are required annually on Form 10-K, so the annual report. And it's going to ask for a number of things that this is where I think a lot of effort is going to have to be made, not only in preparing a disclosure, but making sure that the infrastructure is in place to meet these requirements. And it focuses in on how you're conducting a risk assessment of cybersecurity, whether you're using outside parties, what sort of policies and procedures are in place to select those third parties that may assist in the risk assessment, and then going into actively managing the risk, what sort of activities are in place to prevent, detect, and minimize the effects of cybersecurity incidents, the use of business continuity, contingency, and recovery plans, which is huge, especially as it relates to ransomware, any sort of previous incidents that may have occurred that have informed the organization in making changes to not only policies and procedures, but also governance and the use of technology, risk and incidents affecting the results of operations and the financial condition of the company, as well as whether these cybersecurity risks are part of the business strategy, financial planning, or capital allocation process. So up to the highest levels, they want to know what is the connection to setting the strategic direction of the company itself. And then on the right-hand side here, it gets to risk oversight and what management's role is in assessing and managing cybersecurity risk and implementing the policies and procedures, but also how the board fits into the equation. And that is making sure that the board itself has the requisite cybersecurity expertise, whether it's in one individual or spread across, maybe it's a committee as it relates to the risk committee or audit committee of the board. Also, specifically, they're going to want disclosed, again, this is on an annual basis within the annual report or Form 10-K, who on the board is personally responsible. And again, it may be one person or it could be a committee. The process by which the board is informed about these risks, who's it coming from, how often they're being informed. And then finally, whether the board or the board committee that's responsible considers the cybersecurity risks as part of the business strategy, risk management, and financial oversight. And if so, how they integrate those risks from that perspective. And that, I think, is going to really focus organizations to take a new and fresh look at how they're not only managing their cybersecurity risks, but risks and risk management as a whole. Now, there are 3 additional disclosure proposals that I wanted to highlight, and I'm not going to drill into them as deeply as I did with the public company proposals. But I just wanted to highlight these, especially for those who may be in specific industries here, as to the impactful nature of these requirements. And overarching all 3 of these, I would say, and what kind of brings them together in a common way is that these 3 are all examination-based disclosure proposals, meaning that the regulators are going to require some form of examination to ensure that if a certification or certain statements are made, that they can be backed up. And so we start first with New York State and the New York Department of Financial Services. And you may be asking, well, this is just one state out of 50. How important can it be? Well, New York State, as those in the financial services industry know, is one of the primary regulators and overseers of the Wall Street financial institutions. And so got to make sure that those institutions are well managed according to the rules from New York Department of Financial Services. In that, for the last several years, they've been required to maintain adequate cybersecurity practices. But just in the last year, as part of an amendment to that original requirement, which is the Part 500 listed here with a link, and you can go to the details, they are being asked to do a major thing, and that is requiring a signed certification by the highest ranking executive and the CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer, for the cybersecurity requirements that have been previously established, plus additional ones, including things like what is the total authority and responsibility for the CISO, what senior governing body is overseeing the risk, what sort of practices are being pursued as it relates to vulnerability, access management, multi-factor authentication, inventory of data, assets, certainly training and monitoring of the risks associated with cybersecurity. And then finally, and I think most importantly, what sort of business continuity, disaster recovery, or incident response plans are in place. And again, this goes directly to the need for better ransomware protection. Those are huge requirements. At the same time, the SEC has gone beyond just the public company requirements into the arena of investment advisors, registered investment companies, as well as the business development companies associated with investments, in making sure that they have the right procedures in place to manage cybersecurity, similar to what they're requiring of public companies, but a little bit more in depth. And at the same time, the US Department of Defense has updated their CMMC certification to require, in a very similar way to the New York Department of Financial Services, certification made by senior executives. And this is very similar to Sarbanes-Oxley, but it's going to require a 3-year cycle of risk assessment. And the first 2 years, depending on the nature of the data that may be being managed by third parties who are supporting DoD activities, that the first 2 years are going to have audits. And then the third year, there needs to be an affirmation from a senior executive that they are still in compliance. And so this is a huge impact to companies of all sizes that may have a very significant impact on classified data and its usage. Let's talk a little bit about how you can enhance your cybersecurity program to improve your disclosures, but also ways you can use technology to help bolster that sort of information gathering and understanding. So this next slide shows some survey results from the same survey I mentioned before around security risks. And again, this is a group of chief information security officers that we polled. And the focus of this slide is what sort of technology are they using to improve their cybersecurity program. And what's very telling here for me is that these organizations, in my view, are relying most heavily on technologies that are probably going to be the least effective at helping them manage the risk management challenge. And the reason I say this is based on my experience of being a leader of a risk management organization in a very large institution, but also in my research, that the keys to success for risk management lie in what I call the 3 C's. And it's so important to have all 3 of these covered. The first being effective communication. So being able to communicate that risk understanding across the organization, especially as it relates to business leaders and folks who are on the front line. The second is not only communicating the risk effectively or talking about, what are the potential impacts of a given risk, but also understanding the proper context of those risks. So where are the most relevant risks to the organization? When you're talking about cybersecurity, it's very important to have that relevance understood because there are just a infinite number of threats and vulnerabilities in all sorts of technology assets, but it's only those that are really focused on the most relevant parts of the organization as it relates to the business, but also strategically where the organization is headed. And then finally, you've got to have the really solid and robust collaboration amongst all parties across the business, all the way up to the senior executive and board level. And so to do that, you're going to have a technology in place that enables all three of those. What I would say here on these results, you have 79% virtual meetings, 68% internal communication channels like Slack, and then 55% email. I think some of this is certainly due to the fact that we're still in the remote or hybrid mode of working from the pandemic. But also, I will tell you, just based on my experience, that a lot of these are viewed as the easier ways to communicate with folks, as opposed to either meeting with them in face-to-face meetings, where only 23% do that, or by using some form of integrated risk management, a platform. And what am I talking about there? As it relates to integrated risk, and this is a market that I covered for, again, a decade while I was at Gartner before coming to Audit Board, it's all about addressing 4 key risk objectives. And you'll see these on the graphic here: performance, resilience, assurance, and compliance. And those are 4 objectives that every single organization on the face of the planet has, no matter size, no matter industry, no matter location. And then how do you start to take data in whatever application or manual means that may exist and pull it together to address those 4 key objectives as it relates to certainly the strategic and broader view of risk, or enterprise view of risk across the organization, but also incorporating the newer types of risk as it relates to technology and cyber, pulling those together, understanding how those risks are controlled through policies and procedures, but also impacting products and services, especially as it relates to digital. And you'll see that it involves a wide array of leaders across the organization. And so as you do start to take on a more integrated risk approach and use of an integrated risk platform or technology, you'll start to identify areas of risk that require multiple perspectives. And so, for example, looking at things like business continuity or supply chain risk from a resilience perspective, certainly are going to catch the eyes of the chief operating officer, chief procurement officer, but those same folks need to have a really good understanding of the legal risks that are facing the organization as they engage suppliers, vendors, and look to them as they recover from a significant event. So all these folks need to be essentially looking at the same set of risks and understand the same common risk framework. And that's really where it all starts to come together. And this is something that Audit Board is working on solving the challenge of not only integrating the risk view, but then taking that integrated risk view and connecting it to people. And so through those 3 C's, communication, context, collaboration, how do you engage everyone in the organization in that risk dialogue? And that's what the technology is all about. And here are the key steps, but I would frame this in that the best way to organize your to-do list as it relates to these disclosure requirements is to start at the end and to work backwards. And so what do I mean by that? Well, go to the requirements themselves, especially as they're in final form, but even before final form, I think you can get a head start on this and do some form of gap assessment between those requirements and your current cybersecurity practices. And so, that's fairly straightforward. You want to find out what is remaining to be done. But once you do that, then you got to start to looking at the process of disclosure and start to better understand the disclosure process itself as it relates to either creating a quarterly or annual report or disclosing these incidents, from an incident management perspective, how the cybersecurity requirements will fit into that existing process, as opposed to creating a separate process altogether. And then once you've done that, then you need to look at the incident management process itself and understand how it can be shaped and further enhanced by the materiality and the risk quantification that is required to be done. At the same time, you've got to engage the board of directors very early and help them better understand what these requirements are, but also have them tell you how they're going to change the way they operate as it relates to risk oversight, but also who they're going to put in charge, whether it is an individual director or committee, and how that's going to work. And then finally, once you have all those decisions made and you've got a really solid process in place, you've got to make sure you've got the right technology solution to enable that. And many of you may have those solutions in place, or you may have a number of different individual solutions that you need to tie together. But making sure that either single solution or set of solutions can support your needs is important. And it's important to figure out now as opposed to later. So that's why it's here on this to-do list for you today.